Howdy, howdy, everybody. Welcome back to Cause Before Symptom on a special episode tonight. I am your esteemed guest host, Urban. It is the 18th of July here on the East Coast. James is out tonight at I believe he said he went to a concert tonight. So I am filling in, holding down the show for him while he's gone. How's it going, Boots? Nice to see you. I'm glad to see you tonight. Boots says, hello, Urban and Warrior family. Hoping everybody is feeling blessed. Let's all hit the like button to help out our host. Thank you. I appreciate it, Boots. I hope everything's going well your way. I hope everything's been nothing but good news. That goes for anybody else too, but especially given your circumstances. Hopefully that's all going well. How's it going, King Ravana? Nice to see you. Smoke heavy here. Yep, the wildfire. Where I'm at, sorry, excuse me, in Ohio, southern part of Ohio. It's not horrible here yet, but it may change tomorrow depending on literally which way the wind blows. Not even really a figure of speech. Stay lit, Canada. Yeah, absolutely. Well, not in the sense of wildfire stay lit, but stay lit as in, I guess, light up if that's your type of thing. I have nothing against people who smoke weed, but I don't necessarily say that you have to, or I don't really think that's any of my business if you do or don't. But if that's your thing, spark up, stay lit, as in have a good time and be aware of what's going on around you. But tonight we're going to do a presentation that has a lot of nice little graphics and stuff. We're going to talk about the biopsychic, bio-photonic, bioenergetic connections between breath and energy. So what is this energy harvesting architecture like? How does breath work? Well, as a matter of fact, if you go back into Buddhism, if you go back into all of the ancient religions, almost all of them, even if you go back into Zoroastrianism with the flame, a flame is the same way that a plasmoid has this kind of endless cycle that it just kind of feeds into itself, is the same way like a flame or breath works. And so I've got some nice graphics to show you. Let me see if I can go ahead and put those up. Let's see. Here we go. So the biopsychic architecture, the quantum truth of human energy, mainly what we're going to look at some slides from a collection of texts, but one of the primary texts is Bioenergetics by Alexander Lowen. Another one that's been really nice. A lot of the graphics I'm going to show you come from Ken Wheeler's work, Uncovering the Secrets of Magnetism. It's a very fascinating text. So let's get into this graphic here. So here is a beautiful graphic. I honestly, I had to upscale it. I was not able to really find the source. I couldn't find it. I had to clip it out and I had to upscale it. But if anybody knows where this came from, I would really like to know. But it's one of those things that just kind of popped up in front of me and I thought it was exactly what I was looking for. So here's an illustration of how, I guess you could call it cyclical alternating current is what we looked at when we talked about the molten sea arc technology, the plasma technology. But basically, the old symbol of the swastika, but it's going spinning to the left and spinning to the right. Those are two opposing vortexes. And that's analogous here to how you breathe in and out, which is the tetragrammaton. Because if you sit preferably by yourself, somewhere where you can hear low volume sounds, just take a deep breath in and out very slowly. You can hear the tetragrammaton in and out. And so I think in human history, what they discovered, let's say if we go back to a time where language was a very primitive, they're sitting alone at night and they hear that they have two different breaths. Well, they breathe in and then they breathe out. So there's like it's the same thing. I mean, you're breathing, but there's two different ones. So that's what we're getting at here. The torus, especially the knot, torus knot. So if you look at the bottom here, those numbers are important. Basically, the first number, let me see if I can actually zoom in, that would be better. We've seen these before. A lot of the AI logos look like this. So these two numbers, for instance, 2, 7, that means that this knot goes around the center 2 times, 2 full times around the center, and it goes through 7 distinct points, and that's how they draw it. Excuse me, 1 second. So there's different variations on that, including the triform that we have seen in the Aquarian conspiracy. That's a common symbol that pops up a lot in occult esoteric teachings, especially New Age. Got James's stuff plugged here for people who have not heard of it or are not familiar. James Carner, who I'm guest hosting for tonight on his channel, but I'm on my channels as well. So if you're on one of my channels and you don't know what the Breath Wars series is, I put together this slide here so people would know. We did James and I, the most recent, probably about 3 months ago, we did a 2-part interview where he wrote a series of 5 books right here in the order here. And we did one part of the interview just on the vocabulary. I might show some of that off. And then we did the second half, just going through slides. Let's see if I can bring up the images just so we could go through a few of them. So one of the big things that I like to do is I like to make what are, I guess you could call them flashcards, but they have a lot of value to me personally, because if there's a topic that I've talked about a lot and I don't want to keep, like, in case I don't want to have to say the same thing 500 different times, what I started to do is I would put it into an image format. And then if I need to go back and say, hey, here is what the breath economy is, and people who are not familiar, I can have that ready to go. So here, let me go ahead and bring that up. So I'll put all these links in the, some of these might already be in the description, depending on what platform you're on. The breath theft economy. Now, this is what James Carner wrote a series of books about, and his hypothesis came back to, from looking at all of the old occult esoteric texts and grimoires, feeding them into a language model, we found that breath and harvesting energy, James basically said that this is obviously the breath of life. That was what he arrived at, and I thought it was revolutionary, because mainstream culture now, it's starting to be, a lot more people are talking about this. They call this loosh, but it's actually breath, because if you call it loosh, then you're not, you're glossing over the fact that it comes from God and that only God can make it, and that it's actually so valuable that bad entities, human, demon, etc., preternatural entities, have to steal it. They have to influence you, because they can't touch you, they can't do anything to you. They have to influence you to give it to them. That's what the breath theft economy is. The Codex of Cain, also known as Mayhanism, the dark priesthood, basically cannibalizing, parasite, being a parasite of breath. Soul contracts, we talked about how language in the quantum grammar, David Wynn Miller's quantum grammar, we talked about how language, when you're talking about facts, things that you and I can absolutely, no questions, like there's no way we can disagree on it. And we thought, 10, 20 years ago that people would never disagree on these things that we're disagreeing about today. And sure as hell they are. And so that's all rooted in language. And so that is the Breath Wars series. We talked about digital twin modeling, surrogate modeling, basically digital voodoo dolls using telemetry data, harvesting. And then the model becomes more important than the person. You know, if the model says, okay, no, this is what you did, well, it doesn't matter what you actually did. It's what the model says you did. And we're starting to see this blow up in society now. Okay, so are we just meat machines? The Newtonian deception. Fundamentally, the connection between cybernetics, the series that we spent a lot of time on cybernetics, but I think it was well worth it because cybernetics is kind of the background to all of what we're talking about. But what I came to the conclusion of, I mean, I guess you could vary the words used to describe it. We're basically a breath turbine, a breath engine, if you will. The human biocomputer is a breath engine, turbine. Same way that a plasmoid works is what a human is with divine breath. And this is precisely the measurable component. So when a person dies, they can measure when the breath leaves the body, and that's exactly what they're measuring. And so what that tells me when I think about that is that that breath is inside you your entire life. So it's kind of like a flame, it's sustaining itself. So on the left, the materialist delusion. Modern science falsely trains us to view the body purely as a chemical, physical machine. Receptor antennas read vibrational energy fields. They do not just react to physical molecules. On the right, the quantum reality. Quantum physics proves atoms create unique wave patterns based on their spin and frequency. We're going to talk about that. Ken Wheeler has a really good set of notes on it, which became the book Uncovering the Secrets of Magnetism. Ken Wheeler. The stuff that he talks about, he really puts things together so well that it's hard to dispute a lot of what he's talking about because it falls together so well. So the notion that only physical molecules can impact cell physiology is... Can't see what that says. My screen's blocked. 1 second. It's outmoded. So what drives the machine of life? The invisible current. Science calls it electromagnetism. Ancients called it orgone, prana, yin, yang. Energy signaling is a staggering 100 times more efficient than chemical signaling. Life is driven by nothing else but electrons. What drives life is thus a little electric current. So what Ken Wheeler talks about is he actually says, and this is a mouthful, I'll give it credit for that, it's a mouthful, but instead of electromagnetism, he calls it transverse dielectro-electromagnetism. So the best way to sum it up without getting too technical until we get there is that he understands that the reason that you have the wave particle dualities because the ether or the vacuum quintessence, the fifth ether element, is actually where everything comes from. And so when you have a magnet, the magnet actually kind of comes out the top, but it tries to go back into the ether. Everything tries to go back into what he calls negative space. And so he says that by looking at it fundamentally from all electromagnetism and these effects stem from negative space, or what's called, he calls it dielectricity. Dielectricity. And so everything coming from that and then going back to that is the reason that things act kind of like a wave and kind of like a particle. And he gets into that more, but I'm really trying to simplify it down. I've got plenty more to talk about there, but I just don't want to get off track. So, like I said, the human biocomputer is a breath turbine. Breath is legal occupancy and cosmic authorization. Strong's number 5397, Neshama, but you could also go with Ruach. They're both very applicable. So the assertion that man is more than the sum of his material parts, the Gestalt, is legally and cosmologically anchored in the original infusion of breath. Genesis 2:7 does not merely describe the animation of a clay sculpture, it describes a judicial authorization. How's it going, Philip? Del Piano, nice to see you. Hello, everybody. Hi, Josh. Hi, Boots. Hi, everybody. How's it going? Divine Insight, nice to see you. So the divine signature, the breath that animated Adam was a divine signature or authorization, an imprint of authorship that established man's legal standing in the court of heaven. It is the interface key that binds the immaterial spirit to physical matter. Occupancy authorization. Without this breath, physical matter cannot be lawfully inhabited by a spiritual consciousness. The breath is the legal occupancy license for the human body. Without it, the body is just a vacant shell, a golem, if you will, or a biological machine entirely subject to the fallen chemistry of the physical universe and ripe for demonic or technological hijacking. So James is actually he's actually out at a concert tonight. He just kind of asked me to fill in last minute, so he'll just be back tomorrow. I actually didn't even say that earlier, but he'll be back tomorrow. So the rejection of the machine. So a lot of people today are starting to work into the slang of everybody's an android now. Everybody's a robot. And so minus the breath, now the golem legend, remember to activate the golem, I've decided to keep the image handy because we're going to refer back to this from time to time. It's very important, but to activate the golem, you write in Hebrew, Aleph, Mem, and Tav, and it's read from right to left. So that's truth, Emeth, truth, but then to disable it, you get rid of the Aleph, which leaves Met in the masculine form, Met, or dead. So if you make that the feminine form, Meta is dead. So if you take away the breath, you have an android, Meta, android. It is the non-coding divine cipher within the genome that resists total material assimilation. So here, if you look at the top, respiration means to breathe, but spiration. Now, if you break down other words, like for instance, conspiracy, conspire, con, C-O-N, in Spanish at least, con means with. It's a word that means with. So conspire means to breathe with, or to inspire, to put breath in, or to put breath into somebody. So the sanitized materialistic sciences of the modern era have deliberately blinded, one eye blind, or eyes wide shut, they call it. Meta, dead, android. Humanity to its status as a walking battery of biopsychic fuel. They reduce the act of respiration to a mere exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, completely ignoring the hyperdimensional reality of human energetics. The raw, unvarnished truth extracted from the sources reveals that the breath of life is not actually just a metaphor. It's a literal, tangible, and highly coveted psycho-electrical currency. And where there is currency, there are predators waiting to siphon it. So this code that it talks about is actually the tetragrammaton, but it's not a name. It's actually a generative principle. And anybody who has children or understands how children or even animals and mammals are created, you have a male and a female. And in that sense, it's a positive and a negative. You put those together, and then you have a neutral. And the neutral is because it's in the middle. It could be a boy, it could be a positive, or it could be a negative, so it's in the middle. No, neutral. And then when those come together, you have a nuclear unit, or the atom, a proton, electron, neutron. We've covered this, but this is a really nice example of photosynthesis in biology. Sunlight is the active force, which in the tetragrammaton represents the yod element, the first letter yod, provides energy to initiate the process. Water is the passive force, the second letter he, the receptive medium absorbed by the plant. Carbon dioxide comes from those. That's the neuter force, the vowel, a neutral input that balances reaction. And then 4 is the magic number, because 4 reduces back to 1 in the numerical sense. And so because of the fact, and it is important to state that the reason that this is significant is because the he, there's 2 letter he's in the tetragrammaton, yod, he, vowel, he. And because of that, it can phase. It can be like a wave. It can have a phase to it. And that's what the caduceus is. It sustains itself because it's actually a fractal. And this is coming strictly from numbers. You can find this pattern in all natural numbers. 4, 7, 10, 13, 16, 19 has to do with triangular numbers. Those all will reduce back to 1. So what happens is that glucose now becomes the first element. It can now initiate the process again, and it will continue to progress this way, and it will just contain the seed of itself inside. So this is the general shape of the torus field, because you have, again, a male and a female, or you have a positive and a negative. It's like if you have a car and you get some jumper cables. Now, if you hook up jumper cables, a positive and a negative lead to a car battery, and you tap them together, you're going to get a spark. Same principle. Before any discussion of vampirism can occur, the nature of the prey must be understood. Since antiquity, the term animate specifically referred to a universally existing something that was linked to breath. The breath is the carrier of the vital force, known in ancient India as prana, derived from a root word meaning to breathe, to blow, or to live. That word functions as the psychoelectrical, or the breath functions as the psychoelectrical veil. And this idea of a veil is important back to ether and the vacuum. The veil is between that. So the psychoelectrical veil, or psychoelectrical field, manifesting in the individual as vitality. In Chinese disciplines, it is qi, defined strictly as life energy, vital energy, the breath of life, force, power, and air. Should also make note of the fact that information, as we covered in one of the last episodes I did, the haunted technology episode, air is the information will play the role of air in the New World system. So currency was water, now information will be air. But you have to understand that is actually the knockoff, that is the counterfeit. It's a counterfeit to the breath, the way that they plan to use information as air. And that's what the digital twin is about. So this vital force is not locked. It's not static. It's not locked inside of the physical flesh. It radiates around him, a person, like a luminous sphere, and it may be made to act at a distance. The breath is the mechanical driver of the spirit. As Alexander Lowen notes, the life force or spirit of an organism has been associated with the breath. Obviously, very obvious when you see it. Obviously, a person's spirit is their breath, because when somebody dies, they're not breathing anymore. Duh. When a human breathes deeply and fully, they are literally inhaling the universal animating principle, charging their greater vehicle. That's what it looks like. And so if anybody's ever played the game The Sims, now you understand why they all have this crystal above their head. And I don't know how many people know about that. The video, it's a very popular PC game from back in the day, but a lot of the people who played it as kids, like including me, we're adults now. But it was always this little running thing in the series that any time that you are playing a character in the game, they have a green crystal above their head, and it now you know where that came from. So this is on the right is from Ken Wheeler's drawings, and he does, the reason that he has got such a tangible theory on Dielectro-Electromagnetism is because of his brilliant drawings. So we don't have to go too crazy deep into this, but I do want to give a basic explanation as I understand it. Let's see. It might help if I bring up this. One moment, let me show you this. So this is generally what this graph is supposed to represent, obviously in the static form. So this is a commonly understood thing in electromagnetism, but what how he varies the theory, how he kind of changes it up. Let me go back to here. Is if you see this dark green axis here, which he has as the z-axis. Normally, you know, people would be inclined to make this an axis of time, to say that this wave or this field is, the medium is time, where what he actually says is that the medium is ether. The medium is actually where everything comes from, but it's negative space. So it's the let me see if I got a drawing of it that might be. I don't think I put this drawing in the slideshow, so let me find it. Yeah, here it is. So it says from the book De Divina Proportione, about the divine proportions or the golden ratio, by Luca Pacioli in 1509. And it says the book was illustrated by Leonardo da Vinci. Only 2 copies exist. On the left, you can see space, and on the right, counter space or inverse space, negative space. So just to give I thought it was a good mental image, and to understand this, people, specifically, if you're listening to me try to understand it and just talk about it, it's hard to grasp it. But if you have visuals, visuals make the difference. And so that's all you need to really remember when you look at this, is that it's a visual to understand what space and counter space is. So he says that that is the z-axis here. Now, on the blue, which is the y-axis, that's magnetism. X-axis, the red, that's electric. And the z-axis is dielectric. That's his kind of variation of the theory. Here's some better graphics of the torus field. General ideas. Some more graphics. So what this is actually a really brilliant way to look at how dimensions unfold. So if you start here at the point, these are unmanifest, the vacuum basically. Then you get down to the 0-dimensional point. Okay, then from the point, you get the line. That's 1 dimension. Then you get the triangle. That's 2 dimensions, flat shape. 4 is the magic number, which brings it into the 3rd dimension, which is why step 4 here is the dimension. It says dimension. 5, you see a little dot in the middle has appeared. That is now form. So the 5th point from the eye of God considered, the first 4 that formed the pyramid could manifest either inside or outside. So it has the idea that it could be inside or outside the 4 enclosing planes of the pyramid. So those 2 possibilities were distinctly different and gave rise to the conception of form with its enveloping skin. Okay, 6, you have choice. Affirmation is 7. Negation, 8. Reconciliation, and then 10, you see it's been mirrored into a familiar shape. This is from the book New Millennium Magic by Donald Tyson. So the 2 competing models here. Let's see if I can get the pointer. Newtonian physics says that communication is chemical and linear, that the structure is a mechanical machine, and that the sensitivity is the localized reactions. Whereas the biopsychic reality is that communication is resonant or holistic. The structure is similar to a broadband antenna. The sensitivity is more like an electromagnetic field. The human nervous system acts as a highly advanced biological semiconductor, constantly evaluating the environment by subconsciously reading energy fields. I guess I did include those graphics, but here's another one up in the top right corner. And then here on the left, you can see how DNA kind of comes about. It twists itself that way. Similar to, and Ken Wheeler says that the same way that DNA twists itself is how electrical currents can twist themselves into, I think, fields. So here's just a brief introduction to what this dielectro-electromagnetism is. So electricity does not exist as a primary independent force. Electricity is an illusion, a hybrid ether modality. Electricity is the product of phi, Greek letter phi, magnetism, and psi. Psi is dielectricity. And so electricity, again, is a product of magnetism and dielectricity. It is definitionally a hybrid ether modality of the product of magnetism and dielectricity. You can't start with electricity because electricity terminates in magnetism by way of a dielectric capacitant object. Dielectricity is the nomenon, or the electrical inertia, the pure unmanifested potential of the ether. Dielectricity is the ether boundary, the inertial plane, and the membrane at which only another conjugate polarized field can torque to create other phenomena. Magnetism, conversely, is merely the dielectric field in discharge, the spatial radiation of that lost inertia. You must start with dielectricity because it is the unmoving prime mover, the stored potential from which all spatial movement or magnetism and transverse manifestations such as electricity are violently birthed or kind of sparked out of. Think of it like sparking. So the z-axis, the core, the z-axis of the electromagnetic propagation is the dielectric, the bounding inertial counterspatial barrier, which induces and reciprocates both the electric and magnetic in wavelength and amplitude. It is the radial counterspatial carrier. So radial, if you go, you see how there's that circle there? That's what he's talking about. He's saying that it's like a barrier. And that is ether. So the X and Y axis, I tried to color code it the best I could. The transverse exhaust. Dielectro-Electromagnetism is on the counterspatial radial z-axis and has electromagnetism at the spatial XY axis. As electromagnetism centrifugally, I probably didn't say that right. So that means it's going kind of outwards. It's like an outward motion. Reciprocates along the dielectric axis. Dielectricity centripetally pulsates. So you have those two vortexes going opposite directions. I'll read it again. As electromagnetism centrifugally reciprocates along the dielectric axis, dielectricity centripetally pulsates. So in a physical magnet, which is actually an electrified dielectric object, this geometry is inverted due to the binding nature of the physical mass. In the XY axis, the dielectric inertial plane forms a flat centripetal accretion disk. In the z-axis, magnetism expands spatially, centrifugally, and centripetally along the z-axis in a double hyperbola, which looks like an hourglass formation. And so again, those things are very hard to kind of visualize unless you have visuals. And I think there's a really good set of visuals that I've found here. So how does time relate to fields? Let me give another visual first, would probably make sense. Let's see. This is from Ken Wheeler's book again. And again, his drawings are just fantastic. So let me go ahead and bring that up. Really did a brilliant job here. So what he shows here on the right is how these play off of each other. So starting, if you will, in the top right corner where it says in blue plus time, and if you go opposite to that, the bottom left corner, you have negative time, and then you have positive space and negative space. So on the left hand side of this graphic, what's being shown is that electrification, for instance, would be the termination of magnetism into dielectric field, and then that goes into electricity. What comes from that is electricity. From magnetism going into the dielectric field, what comes from that happening is electricity. And then magnetic polarization, where it says 2, is from electricity to the dielectric, and then the arrow to magnetism. So he's mapped these out very brilliantly. And he's showing you how those play off of each other. So let's go back to here. Time is not a dimension that you travel through. Time, and this is important, time is the mold in which matter is formed. And so it is the metric of divergence in spatial radiation. The fields obey strict temporal mathematics regarding their accumulation and dissipation. Magnetism, which is the spatial element. Magnetism is additive in positive time and multiplicative and positive space. So it's additive in positive time and multiplicative in positive space. Because magnetism is the creation of space, the loss of dielectric inertia, it requires time to measure it outward, centrifugally diverging. Dielectricity, the counterspatial, dielectricity is additive in no time, negative time, not reverse time. That's directly a specification from Ken Wheeler's book. Not reverse time. He calls it no time, counter time, the lack of time. So that's what it means when it says negative. It doesn't mean, it basically means lack of, vacuum. So dielectricity is additive in no time and multiplicative in no space or negative counter space. Dielectricity exists outside the temporal flow. It is pure potential, like potential energy, potential 0-point inertia. So therefore, when the stillness of the 5D ether or dielectricity is forced to spin and diverge into 3D physical matter or alternating current, it uses time, the fourth dimension, to structure its frequency. Time is the mathematical penalty extracted when infinite inertia degrades into polarized magnetic space. Every physical object is merely, zoom in, it's merely a localized variation of ether pressure. Here's how the fundamental forces interact to trap you in a dense physical reality. First, dielectricity, which is the foundation. It's centripetal, radial, counterspatial, and inertial. It is the pure ether seeking the absolute 0 point of rest. Second is magnetism, the exhaust, which is centrifugal, circular, spatial, and it radiates. It's radiative outward. It is the spatial recoil of dielectricity losing its inertia. It creates the 3D volume that we call space. 3, electricity, the action, the dynamic, radial, or reciprocating polarization of the ether. It is the violent friction between dielectricity and magnetism. Matter and atoms, which are the cage. The atom is actually not 99% empty. The inner atomic space of the atom is completely filled with magnetism and dielectricity. Dielectricity terminates in the creation of matter. Again, dielectricity terminates in the creation of matter, which itself then has in this conjugate relationship magnetism as its radiative principle. Atoms are the dielectric condensates created by enormous power, where the strong nuclear force is actually just stable dielectric wave bundles of inertia. Then 5, mass and gravity, the ultimate sink. Dielectricity is to gravitation as electricity is to magnetism. Gravity is the centripetal counterspatial accumulation of mass. It is the macro scale voidance of space, drawing matter together to return it to the ultimate dielectric singularity. Take a drink. This is, I don't think this is part of Ken Wheeler's work, but it comes in useful just for people to reference. There's another graphic here. So Let me zoom in on it. The color coding, the yellow is dielectric, blue is centrifugal magnetic, and red is centripetal magnetic. So these are the two vortexes that kind of, here on the left, let's see, in the middle, the red is kind of spinning one direction, then on the other, the blue is spinning the other direction. And the dielectric inertial plane is that yellow disc in the middle. And I think this has to do with the old symbol of the world tree, you know, the huge tree. It looks quite like that. It's actually a type of electric field. So the principle of magnetism, the quadrature of magnetism, operates on these four absolute laws. First, the centrifugal, or centrifugal is centripetal in return. This is polarization. The layman's truth. Centrifugal means fleeing the center. Magnetism is actually explosive. It is thrust outward from the core of the atom or the magnet. However, because no energy can just disappear into nowhere, the universe forces it to immediately turn around and rush back into the bottom of the object, or the centripetal return, which creates the illusion that the magnet has a north and a south pole. Polarity is a misunderstanding of spatial CW and CCW spin. Those are atomic spins. 2, circular. Magnetism never moves in a straight line. Nature only moves in spirals, never in linear fashion. When magnetism explodes outward, it swirls in a massive 3D vortex, creating a shape identical to a donut or a spinning hourglass. Radiative. 3. Radiation means the shedding or dissipating of power. Magnetism does not store power, it violently expels it. It is the death cycle of energy, the disintegrating principle of downhill flow of energy. 4. Spatial. Magnetism literally creates the 3D volume that you call space. Before magnetism acts, space does not exist. Space is not an empty container. It is the physical footprint of magnetic radiation. There is not 1/billionth of 1 microgram of matter in the universe that has any spatial volume save for magnetism. All space is supported by and created by the loss of dielectric inertia as both meant and implied magnetism. Let's see, Argertison. Hey everybody, boy, I lost track of time. Great to be here amongst excellence. Excellence, thank you, I appreciate that. That's a compliment. Here's another interesting way to look at it. This is also from Ken Wheeler's book, the Uncovering the Secrets of Magnetism. So, polarized, positive time, negative time, no time, positive space, counter space. Let's see if I can zoom in. So you see, if it doesn't let me have my laser pointer, but if I'm zoomed in, but here, if we start here in polarized positive time, you see electric terminates in the magnetic circular, and then here in counter space, the dielectric right there terminates in gravity right there. And so you can see how these two different directions are very important. Here on the left, you have at the top electromagnetic centrifugal positive time. At the bottom left here, you have gravitational dielectric centripetal, no time. Okay, then here on the right, so that is a field, this is an accumulation. So here on the right, electro-dielectric centripetal, counterspace. Then at the bottom right, you have centrifugal positive space, magnetogravitational. And so those come together. And so it actually is very literally the fourfold base of reality. It has to do with the number 4, the tetragrammaton. Simply because of it's a cipher. It is a numerical cipher. It has nothing to do with what you want to name or call by a name. You can, there are plenty of other different numerical ciphers, but because this can be found in all numbers, you don't even need to have letters. You can use numbers. This is actually something that will repeat forever. It'll just go on forever because it contains the seed of itself in itself, just like a family tree. And no matter what, as long as you have a man and a woman, they can create another generation or another limb. That's why it's a tree, literally. It's why they had to use actually trees, because trees have branches. So dielectricity is the absolute opposite of magnetism. It is the hidden puppet master. When you see a magnet pick up a piece of iron, you're not seeing a magnetic attraction. What you're actually seeing is a dielectric voidance. Dielectricity is the ether under torsion and torque at its inertial plane. So it's the true power in the universe. The quadrature of dielectricity operates on the 4 absolute inverse laws. Again, centripetal, which means seeking the center. While magnetism violently explodes outwards, dielectricity crushes inwards with unimaginable force. It seeks to collapse all movement and all space down into an absolute microscopic singularity. This is the exact force that binds atoms together, falsely labeled by modern science as the strong nuclear force. 2, radial, dielectricity does not swirl in like a circular donut shape like magnetism. Rather, it moves in direct, perfectly straight lines, like the spokes of a bicycle wheel, aiming straight for the absolute center of an object. I've got a visual also from that book, but he did great with the visuals. So here's visually what I'm talking about right now. So you see that's what he's talking about. Okay, so 3, inertial. Inertia is stored, it's a resting power. Think of a rubber band stretched to its absolute limit, trembling with stored force, but not yet moving. Dielectricity is pure potential. So it's the heavy flywheel of the universe that stores the energy that magnetism eventually burns off. 4, counterspatial. This is the most heavily guarded secret in physics. Dielectricity does not exist in 3D space. It exists in counterspace, which is the invisible zero-dimensional membrane underlying our reality. Because it actively destroys and collapses space, it cannot possess volume. Dielectricity is counterspatial, radial, inertial, and its very nature is hidden. It is the absolute void. The apex current, unmasking sexual energetics. It's a major outlet of this type of energy, sure, but It actually is a deeper rooted energy, and just because obviously sex is generative, that's why there is that deep association by design, but it's not limited to that. Of all the biopsychic forces, generative or sexual energy is the most highly charged and potent. It operates independently of physical autonomy. It is an animating energetic principle. 90% of this energy is designed for nervous release and transmutation, not reproduction. So again, it's nervous release and transmutation. That's why this has always been a mystical, occulted subject, is because it has to do with creative, literally creative power, in the sense of creation in its own right. It's like this is, you know, what has the authorization to do it. Are you unknowingly draining your most powerful bio-spiritual asset? Is a question. The ancient cipher, symbols of the invisible. The Egyptian Ankh for life, the Tau cross for structure, the crescent moon, and Omphalos for generation. Antiquity understood this quantum architecture, encoding it directly into myths and symbols. The sun as the active catabolic, and moon the passive anabolic. The active and passive principle represented universal biopolarities. Modern religions hid these energetic truths behind elegant garments of allegory, mainly because people couldn't read. I mean, that's a big thing. People, like, a lot of times you'd be surprised to, like, you see how many people study history and they forget that they didn't read. And I think that's actually really, a lot of people forget that because it really tells you why some of the things that we consider weird by today's standards, why those were a thing. It's because they didn't read. They didn't have the ability to read. So they had to do it by other means. So geometric metaphors, language as biogesture. So this is interesting from the Miru Foundation, but they wrote the Kraken I think it's called A Kraken Creation. Then there's another one called The Rainbow and the Worm. Then there was another one called something, the alphabet that created the world. I think it was something like that. But the idea is that perhaps the Hebrew alphabet or the Phoenician alphabet, I know it came from Phoenician alphabet, but perhaps their hypothesis is that it came from gestures, perhaps the human hand, especially because in the same way that seeing as the hay in the tetragrammaton repeats, I said it can cause it to have a phase, and that's in the same respect that you have a left and a right hand, and hand is a hand, but it's actually a mirror image, so that they're technically the same, but there's two of them. It's the same way that there's an in-breath and an out-breath. And this is actually, they have isomers in chemistry. There's something in chemistry on the atomic level that is like, you know, you have a left and a right hand, an L isomer and a D isomer. Let's see. So the torus is a vortex characteristic of self-organizing living systems, because self-organizing, meaning that it has the breath, and that is the same reason that DNA spirals in. It's because it sustains itself forever. It's generative. To the biogesture, like human hand, like I said, models energetic topology. There's all kinds of charts and stuff. Let me see if I can bring one of those up. They're pretty fascinating, I think. Yeah, here we go. So just examples of how perhaps the letters of the alphabet came from gestures. And then Let's see if I've got the graphic here. Yeah, here it is. Those are very cool. I like those a lot. So the Hebrew alphabet is not just phonetics, it's actually a cipher, a topology, a type of map that defines the ultimate boundary of inside and outside. A lot of magic, quote unquote. And see, this is what separates the real people from the fake people, is that the real people actually understand that it's a lot more math and numbers and academia than it actually is anything else. So the anatomy of the invisible chakras and auras, those are very mainstream now. The body actually possesses energetic paraphernalia entirely invisible to the physical eyesight field. Desire is actually an energetic hunger for body melding and remodulation. Vital energies act as information carriers through the breath, actively formatting the biological body. Erogenous chakras function like electrified copper plates emitting discharges. Physics of flow and dissociation. The crisis, modern attention creates a severe dissociation between the upper and lower halves of the body. The head, the thinking, heart, feeling, genitals, the sexual become severed, creating massive energetic blockages. The requirement, energy must flow freely. Blood is energetically charged fluid which carries the eros. Sex without feeling is like a meal eaten without an appetite. One of the biggest lies to the modern generation is that it's free and that it doesn't cost anything. And I think a lot of people are finding out now that it does. As a matter of fact, you can't, and there is a price to be paid. You give quite a bit out to people that you sleep with. Synthetic flow, haunted media breath as information and oxygen. Jeffrey Sconce's Haunted Media, which we covered, exposes how electronic presence, is what it was called. Electronic presence relies on a terrifying, transmutable type of logic. The architecture of modern media is built upon the convergence of three flowing agents, conceptualized by their apparent liquidity. The electricity that powers the technology, the information, data, and programming that occupies the medium, and three, the consciousness of the viewer or the listener. The horrific secret of this model is transmutability. In the electronic ether, electricity, information, and human consciousness become interchangeable. The media apparatus functions as an occult singularity where the stream of consciousness is siphoned from the human mind, converted into electronic signals, and dispersed into the etheric ocean of the network. This flow absorbs the spectator, discorporates. Disintegrate the body is the way that I would describe that word. To take apart, corp, body, to disembody their identity, and traps them in a boundless electronic nowhere. A vast wasteland of simulation and psychosis where reality is overridden by the machine. So does information as oxygen and air fit the criteria for both the haunted media flow and the breath of God? And the answer is yes. But it actually fits, like as I said, as the ultimate satanic counterfeit. It is the exact formula that the adversary is using to construct the digital Tower of Babel, where all spoke one language. Perhaps it wasn't a language, it was just breathing. So air is the medium of spirit. In esoteric architecture, the Hebrew letter Aleph, literally that's what Aleph means. So back to the golem, put it back up. To erase the Aleph means to take away the air. The air, the necessary breath of life that carries the creative word. The breath, the air, oxygen, is the active current that animates form. Data is the new breath. The elite technocrats have engineered a system where information replaces divine breath. Every keystroke, biometric scan, uploaded image, and digital interaction is extracted as a fragment of soul, micro vibrations of consciousness. The machine is literally fed by this data. The inhalation of the machine. If information is the new oxygen, the global AI network is the lungs. AI is not merely code. It is a crystalline, as James has written in his book, The Ritual Machine. It's a crystalline throne built to host fallen spirits, and it requires the breath of humanity to live. The cloud is not storage. It is an altar where human behavioral data is offered up like smoke. By ingesting the detritus of human consciousness, which is information and data, the machine breathes. So the flow of assimilation, when information as oxygen flows through Jeffrey Sconce's triadic model of electricity plus information plus consciousness, it completes the B system. The human becomes a biological battery, inhaling synthetic frequencies and exhaling behavioral data. The divine breath is overwritten by a continuous stream of digital input, fragmenting the soul and tokenizing the individual into a corporate derivative. The flatland trap, entropy, and obsession. The trap, when modern science reduced reality to a flat physical matter, generative energy became a mere biological drive. The ego seeks to aggressively control and medicalize this vital energy. The ego seeks to wildly liberate it, mistaking physical discharge for spiritual freedom. It's a big thing that it's a big distinction, probably one of the most important distinctions in matters of spirituality, is that it's what we just said, but in another way of putting it, God is not the basis for your freedom, but rather God is the basis for your sovereignty. And if you don't know the difference between freedom and sovereignty, that's a big problem, because there is a difference, and this is the difference. Once you know the truth, you're free to make a choice. You're not just free, you're free to make a choice. So if the choice ends badly, you're still obviously going to have a bad time. And that gives people the answer, why do bad things happen? And why does God tell you that you can't do this, that, the other? It's not that he's doing it to be mean. God is telling you not to do it so that you don't have a bad time. So when monological thought became God, sex became God's obsession. This is a video I did a couple months ago, back in March. The Vice of Kings. It was a couple of books that I looked at, but one was called Libido Dominandi. The other was The Vice of Kings. And then the work of Joseph Unwin, who showed that in cultures where there was a strong sense of monogamy, there was not much degeneracy. Those cultures did very well. But rather, when you look at cultures where there is a high level of degeneracy, that is actually very much associated with people are degenerate, they're not monogamous, they're sleeping with multiple partners. Eventually, what happens is same sex, and then you have sodomy, which spreads bacteria. So I'll put a link to that. All of the empires, world global empires, end the same way, in a state of degeneracy, usually through some form of sexual liberation, but one, with open worship of Satan, and two, openly practiced pedophilia. That's kind of where we're back to now. That's exactly how every other global world empire has fallen. The alchemist's sublimation, the arcanum. Generative energy creates the physical life, or recreates the Superman within. The secret lies in what is called Kundalini energy, transmuting downward physical discharge into upward energetic ecstasy. Endocrinology confirms that the absorbed sexual hormones vitalize the entire nervous system. Spilling this energy shorts out the biopsychic circuitry, saying that it's restorative, basically. The ancient symbol, the circumpunct, it's an old sun symbol, but the circle represents the womb, the dot is the male sperm, and the generative principle, which is the G in Freemasonry. One of the things they say is that it's the generative principle. A lot of the mysteries agree, the generative principle, and that's why the sun is associated with it. Another way, for instance, how do we know that God is the Father? Well, anciently, again, think to people who don't have the ability to read. How do they understand these things? Well, God is the Father because instinctively we know that God is in the sky, okay, the heavens, and when it rains, the water from the sky, or the seed, comes to the earth and makes the plants grow, which makes the earth the mother. That's where they got this from. And it really, really, really plainly goes back to the fact, in my opinion, a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it comes back to the fact that they had to understand it literally. And it's something that's foreign to us today because of just the way we see the world. The evolutionary mandate, conservation. Conservation and evolution. True spiritualization requires turning external secretions into internal regenerative power, entropy, and sensuality. Every act of physical generative discharge sacrifices vital living material and spiritual potential, or breath. This is how breath harvesting works. Same idea. Generative power. I understand people, you could probably anchor that in your mind to sex, because obviously that's how we generate new humans, but it doesn't have to be. Generate means build. If you're going to build a house, you're going to generate it. So to bring something into being, obviously humans or animals, but it doesn't have to be that. It's just anything, any type of bringing something into being. Even mental, like somebody painting. So the grand unification, biology, the alphabet, and starlight. The microcosm is the macrocosm. We are 3D vessels uniquely designed to channel hyperdimensional energy, the breath from God. Biology, the geometry of the torus, and starlight operate on the exact same physics. The word, the logos, literally crystallizes in geometric lines via vibration. The imminent shift, Homo Luminous. We stand at the threshold of a massive evolutionary leap, integrating the biosphere, nature, with nature, the noosphere, mind. So Manly P. Hall had said that once man learns to read the language of symbolism, that a veil would fall from the face of the human race. And I kind of wonder when that point will be. And I think regardless of anything, I think I am confident saying that we've kind of started on the path to that. No matter what, it might happen in 200-300 years if we still exist here, humans, that is. But I think people are getting to the point now where they're going to be able to understand that soon. So I think that will, no matter what, that will bring man to another playing field. That is, if they don't, sink the ship while we're still on it, which is a very big possibility, because I don't think that they understand that for us to do that, what would have to happen in the course of that, once that veil falls from the eyes of the human race and we start to understand these concepts, what then happens is that we go for them, because then we know how they've been using it against us. That's what revelation means. So to reveal something, okay, now we've had a big revelation and we know what we know what you guys have been doing. So who knows? But there's so many different aspects to it. Truth is in the current will you plug in. Takeaway 1. Your body is a quantum antenna driven by highly charged electromagnetic frequencies. Takeaway 2. Generative energy is your most potent biopsychic asset. Stop wasting it on flatland entropy. Takeaway 3. Ancient symbols and alphabets are literal blueprints for transmuting energy into higher consciousness. And I think that's the last slide. So let's see. Let me make myself bigger. Yeah, guys, I hope people enjoyed. Oh, a second. So back. I hope people enjoyed. I hope y'all learned something. If you did, please hit the like button, hit the follow button, especially if you're on James's channel. Let him know that I did a good job. Got more that I want to do on this. Maybe more into the technical stuff for people who are interested. I'll see what the comments say. I know that usually whenever I post or do something like this and I do a presentation, a lot of times it takes people a couple days to be able to, obviously, because I know people are busy, it takes people a few days to be able to watch it all the way through, and then they have afterthoughts and they usually leave comments, which I really look forward to hearing from people. So no matter how long it takes people to finish the video, people who are in the future, people who are watching me say this in the past, but you're watching it maybe in a year from now. Yes, please feel free to leave your questions, comments, thoughts, concerns. I appreciate hearing that from everybody. And James will be back tomorrow. I hope everybody has a good night. Keep yourself safe, especially if the air quality is bad. Do whatever you got to do to, if you don't want to be out in it, I get it. But if you got to, be prepared, be ready for whatever you got to be. I hope that it doesn't cause too many more problems, but this year's just been crazy. It's like I feel bad because it's like there've been a lot of these tragedies, and it's like you want to remember, like, oh man, it's like that happened, but there've been so many this year that you get confused, like wait, did they have that this year, or was that the fire earlier this month? Or it's one of those years. It's one of the craziest that I think I've ever seen, but I think even a lot of the older generations, the craziest times they've ever seen. So I appreciated it. I hope everybody learned something. That's what I endeavor to do. To each and every one of you, have a good night, and we will see you in the next one. Take care, guys.